We certainly want to wish all of those family members well. If you are listening right now, one of the things that was also celebrated this past week was the 70th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education.
Yeah.
That landmark Supreme Court ruling. And I think what's interesting is a report was done about 4 years ago, I want to say, maybe 5 years ago, that basically stated it was a study of schools in the state of Texas and around the country. And the question was, is education better for minority students now after Brown versus the Board of Education than it was before in desegregated schools? And the conclusion that they came to is it was better before.
You know what's interesting? There's an article, and actually I think I meant to send it. I didn't, so I'm mentioning it now. But Axios put out an article, and they were talking about kind of how that's changed. You know, I mean, there was obviously such a push, or reason why we had to have Brown 2 really to try to encourage that deliberate speed to actually happen.
Yeah.
And how certain areas of town became more segregated, at least the high schools, and then kind of how it's changed. And they specifically mentioned Westbury High School. And so instead of 91, it's 30% Caucasian, 43% Black, 18% Hispanic, and 22, it's 1% white, 28% Black, 67% Hispanic. And obviously the demographics of the neighborhood have changed, but the same, it seems like there's just a trend where schools are almost reverting back seemingly. And so it'll be an interesting thing to talk about, maybe not necessarily with our esteemed UBS today, because it's something they cannot fix or change, but I think it'll be interesting discussion that we can follow up on, because you're curious just seeing whether it's good, bad, because if it thought it was bad, well, I mean, you might be getting your second bite at the apple.
Well, and I will say this, I think a lot of people felt like, because you got to remember on the other side of Brown versus the Board of Education, that you had the creation, for example, of magnet schools. And those who argue that the magnet school program was a very weak attempt to meet the mandate of Brown versus the Board of Education. That we're going to create this school where it is going to be more ethnically diverse, but you have to apply. So we're not just going to let anybody in, right? You got to be a certain kind of Latino. You got to be a certain kind of African American to be able to get in. And, you know, we ran into that problem when you were a student and you got into River Oaks and your brother and sister were both in elementary school, but we couldn't get you in because they didn't have room. Right? But we had to go through this application process, you know, and almost this justification to get into the Vanguard program. There's a whole lot of things going on. That's the least of HISD's worries, to be honest with you. So, yeah, but shout out to the plaintiffs. They were in the White House this past week. Many of those who were plaintiffs in the Brown versus the Board of Education, because it was actually 4 cases that came together. They were at the White House this week celebrating the 70th anniversary. So hopefully we can make more progress in the next 70 years than we have in these last 70 years. So I'm super excited to have with us the superintendent of the Houston Independent School District, the largest school district in the state of Texas. And let me give everybody just kind of a background on this. So I met the superintendent at a breakfast. Several pastors were there. And I said, Superintendent, man, I would love to get you on my show, give you an opportunity to share your heart, what's going on in the district. There's a whole lot of feelings out there. I want to talk about facts. And so he consented. He said, yes. He said, I'll come on, no problem. And so to make it easier for him, we decided that we would do a pre-record. Well, as it would happen, after the pre-record, a lot of stuff came out on the news. And people were throwing out innuendos. You know, there was a lot of slander going on, in my opinion. Stuff that I knew wasn't based in facts, but people were out there saying stuff in terms of sensationalism. And let me say this to everybody. If you've been listening to Real World, Real Talk for the last 11 years, you know I am an educational advocate for children. I'm all about the kids. I'm not about the adults. I'm about the kids. And if you have failing schools, then you have adults who are failing our children, right? A.J. Crable says, student outcomes won't change until adult behavior changes. I add to that, adult behaviors don't change until adults' beliefs change, right? And if you don't believe that children can learn, then you're not going to teach like they can learn. If you don't believe they have genius in them, you're not going to work to bring it out of them. And so I've been fighting for kids even before I got here 30 years ago. So superintendent came in, we did this great interview, but we were not able, because of the timing, to address the issues. And I felt like it was a lack of journalistic integrity if I put forward the pre-record and didn't ask questions, specific questions around principals and teachers and evaluations and people being let go and were they really fired or were they just not offered a contract on next year? And people were like, oh, how could he fire people, during Teacher Appreciation Week? And I'm like, man, they don't even understand the process, right? Because by the time you get to April, the teachers that you're going to offer contracts to when they come back, and the ones you're not going to offer contracts to. And you let them know in time so they can get on at another school if that's what they want to do, or they may decide not to. But you give them that opportunity, and you're also recruiting teachers, right? And so all of those things came out. Some other things, third future choice, that came out, and there was a lot of innuendos around there. And I'm listening real carefully because I'm like, man, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to discredit what's going on? So I talked to a bunch of people in the media. So I said to the superintendent's people, I said, listen, I can't do and play the pre-record, but I want to offer the superintendent an opportunity to come in live. Yeah. And so there were people who were like, oh man, he ain't gonna come in live. He don't want that smoke. He's not gonna come in live. Superintendent was like, I'm coming.
All right, here we are.
So here we are. Superintendent said he's here for all that smoke.
The man, the myth, the legend. The man.
He said he's here for all of that smoke. Man, welcome to Real World, Real Talk.
Good to be here.
Mr. Mike Miles, Superintendent of the Houston Independent School District. I told him before he has gone where angels fear to tread, because I've been trying to get superintendents on for the last 30 years. The only superintendent I've been able to get on, actually the last 11 years, the only superintendent I was able to get on was Mr. Millett-House. He was the only one that consented to come in and talk with us. All the other superintendents, man, they were running, they were hiding. That's my side of the story, right? But I want to thank Superintendent Mike Miles for coming in. Before we get started, I know you have a message to all of the parents and students of the Houston Independent School District. It's such a large district. What's happening with the campuses? How is the campuses affected by the storm and those kind of things?
Yeah, thanks for giving me an opportunity. We've been working hard this weekend. The teams have been out. First, you got to count your blessings. And one blessing is that even with all the severe storm and all the power outage, we only had a handful of schools that were impacted physically.
Oh, wow.
And were severely damaged. But out of 274 schools, to have only a handful damaged is a blessing.
Yeah, especially
that doesn't discount all the power outage. In fact, we still have 50 schools that don't have power.
Wow.
So we're tracking it closely, and we're going to make a decision on those 50 at 9 o'clock to see if any of them came back up or have come up and their air conditioning works. So you're going to hear that announcement here shortly. But the other thing we were working on today is whether the kids are in school or not, we have some obligation to try to help.
Yeah.
So, you got to think about the families whose food, are perishable, and they had to throw out a whole bunch.
Sure.
Or they've run out. And so that's a whole grocery bill, and it's like you said earlier, even a flat tire can throw a family budget off. And so, we know there are kids out there that are struggling. And then you add, like you said, the air conditioning out. And so we're trying to take care of our kids. So tomorrow, for example, we will be feeding kids or providing some food from 7 to 9 in the morning and from 11 to 1 at noon. And those will be bagged, food in a bag. It won't be a hot meal. But even in those schools that are closed, they can go to that school, and out front they'll get some food from us. And that's not a lot, but it's one of the things we can do.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to help that way too.
Yeah. We're going to dive into some subject matters, and I appreciate you, Superintendent, for coming in and you said, hey, ask me anything. Because a lot of stuff is being said out there, and at the end of the day, for me, it's about these children. And I know we had a conversation already. You shared a lot of stuff that I was talking to people in the media, and they were like, I had no idea. Like, that's the case. That's what's going on. And so if I'm going to push back on you in any area, I need you to tell this story. Like, I need people to know this, right? Because many times people are saying things out of ignorance. They don't know, right? And so they're arguing about stuff and they don't know what's happened. And some of it you've said, some of it they've missed, but people need to know what's going on. So first and foremost, there's been a bunch of talk about you not being qualified to be a superintendent, right? Who is Mike Miles? He's the governor's puppet. They just dropped him in and they brought him in to tear up HISD. Not that we've done a good enough job of tearing it up before you got here, right? So I want you to tell our people from an educational perspective who you are. Because when somebody says, oh, he's not even certified to be a superintendent, it's like, what? Like, where are you getting that from? He doesn't know anything about instruction. He's never been in a classroom. He's just making these changes. So tell our listening audience who you are, first of all, as an educator.
So as an educator, it's also about leadership, right? In education and outside. And so prior to education, I was an Army officer, went to West Point, and commanded a company, and was in the Army Rangers. Left the Army in 1983, graduated from University of California, Berkeley, with a second bachelor's degree in Slavic languages and literature. Then went to Columbia University and got a master's degree in international affairs and public policy. Joined the State Department, worked at the Bureau of Intelligence and Research and worked at the Soviet desk, and then became a diplomat, served in Poland, and then in Moscow during the end of the Cold War days. So that experience prepared me well for looking at systems, looking at organizational effectiveness, and also prepped my background in leadership. But I left the diplomacy after having a couple of kids, and that changes your life. And so my wife and I decided to come back home. It was rough days in Eastern Europe in those days. So we came back home to Colorado. I started teaching, taught for 4 years, loved that. Was a principal for 4 years, and my first 2 years as a principal, I taught middle school, the 7th grade math and 8th grade language arts the second year, every day.
Bless you for that.
For 2 years, just one class of 7th graders and one class of 8th graders all year, because I needed to know a little bit more about the direct impact on teachers of the things we were doing. So I was a principal for 4 years and then became the assistant superintendent for curriculum in Fountain Fort Carson School District. That's by Colorado Springs. So did curriculum for 3 years and then became the superintendent of Harrison School District in Colorado Springs. After the Harrison School District.
And you were there for how
I was there for 6 years.
For 6 years.
And that's an underserved community. All the places I've been in as an educator have been underserved communities. That's my choice. And after 6 years as a superintendent at Harrison, that's when I came to Dallas. So led Dallas Independent School District for 3 years. And then after those 3 years, started my own charter network called Third Future Schools, and then left Third Future Schools a year ago to come here to Houston.
We're going to take a short break. Got to pay a couple of bills here. But when we come back, there are those who have said you're not the right person for the job because of what did or didn't happen at DISD.
Yeah.
I want you to speak to that, if you will, and just give us your perspective on it, because, I've learned the hard way that, beauty and ugliness is in the eyes of the beholder. So I want to hear your perspective on what happened at DISD and how did it prepare you for what you're doing now at HISD. You're listening to Dr. DZ Cofield on your member-supported public radio station, 90.9 KTSU. We are your community station. We'll be back in just a moment.
You has always been a leader.
I didn't even know. I was like, man, shaking hands with
Be a part of the
man, I could probably
evolution
break
of
my arm in
the
6 different places.